Hi, I'm Rachael. I'm a cognitive behavioural psychotherapist, and I'm going to be talking today about negative thoughts. So, I'm going to be talking about how to respond to negative thoughts to avoid getting into a pattern of continuously thinking negative after experience perhaps one negative thought, and also to try and influence yourself to feel better despite having these negative thoughts. So I've talked about this before in the past in a video, and how you can start to gather evidence for a negative thought in terms of what's true about it, what supports it to be true, and also evidence that goes against that thought being true. Then trying to come up with an alternative thought, something quite balanced, not too positive and not too negative. So you're considering both evidence for and against the thought. So this is pretty similar, but it also looks at how to manage thoughts in times when you feel very intense emotional distress, and to perhaps try to visualize this as well. So it's easier for your mind to be able to make sense out of what's going on and perhaps learn a new approach to help manage these situations. So what I would encourage you to do to begin with is draw out perhaps a scale like this. Okay. So here we've got negative mood, and here right at the other end we've got positive mood. So we would perhaps slide up and down this scale in the matter of a day. Perhaps waking up with a negative mood. I know I do. Not a morning person. But perhaps after you wake up, have a coffee, have a chat with somebody, your mood starts to improve. Might get a bit tired during the day, mood starts to decline, have a little rest, mood starts to improve. So you might sort of float about this scale, very, very normal and understandable for that to happen to all of us. Some people would feel they're at the lower end of the scale, with mood being sort of more around here, and some people perhaps more around here, but we all do fluctuate. So thinking about how this affects our way of thinking. So negative thoughts, much more likely to occur when you are experiencing negative mood. So if you're right at the end of this scale in terms of really intense negative mood and experiencing very awful negative thoughts, that perhaps feel quite true as well at the time. So we're going to think about, what do we do with them? Do we notice that mood and sit in it, notice it, feel bad? Do we take on board these negative thoughts and just let them sit there and notice that pattern of more negative thoughts occurring? Or do we do something about it? Now, often I speak to people who say they try to shift their mood right from negative straight to positive, same with thoughts. Negative thoughts, let's switch right to positive thoughts. You might have tried this yourself. I certainly have, with not much success. Maybe some people do have success with this, but a lot of people I've worked with don't, and I certainly don't. So if you think about the brain and habits that our brain can get into, if we're more likely to be hanging around this side of the scale most of the time, just think of the efforts it would take for your mind to then shoot all the other way to the extreme of positive, when most of the time you're in the negative zone. So there's lots of reinforcement all around the negative for your mind for some people. So how do you encourage more positive if trying to think positive and switch your mood to positive doesn't work? So how can we get this process rolling? Because it is possible. Starting to notice from your scale that you write out where you're sitting, perhaps a couple of times a day, when you notice a shift in mood, both positive and negative. mark down on here where it is, mark down any thoughts that you're having as well when you're experiencing that particular mood. So just make a note of them and notice perhaps when you're feeling more in a positive mood, you're more likely to have more positive thoughts. When you're feeling okay, your thoughts might be more okay type thoughts, where you're feeling okay about yourself, about others, about situations. And when you're feeling negative, you might just be thinking negatively about anything. So just notice that pattern for yourself and how the mood can influence your way of thinking. After doing this, try to then think about, okay, how am I going to start interfering with this process without expecting myself to go all the way from the extreme of negative to absolute positive. So have a little think about that now as I hold this up. How are we going to get from negative to positive without forcing that process? So I'm going to explain how to interfere with that process to start to perhaps shift your mood and shift your negative mindset in a realistic way, so you're not expecting an outcome that is positive mood and positive thoughts. It perhaps feels when you're feeling very, very emotional in terms of negative emotion, impossible and too much hard work to expect yourself to feel absolutely better in the space of a few minutes. So looking at this, firstly, what I'd like you to try is look where you are on that scale. So look where you might be. It might be sort of lingering around here. You might realise my mood isn't actually as bad as what I thought. I'm actually sort of around here somewhere. Or you might realise, yeah, this is bad, really, really bad mood at the moment. Validate that emotion, whatever it is, and that feeling that you're having. Let it sit there for a little while. Notice perhaps how that feels in your body as well. So there might be some tension, you might feel sick. It's very uncomfortable to sit and actually notice how you feel. But by doing this, you're allowing yourself to become more resilient towards negative emotion rather than learning that you need to avoid it. So after validating your emotion, then start to think about what thoughts you're having at that time as well. So you might be having negative thoughts that sort of match your negative mood. And you might be thinking a number of things that could be negative. So it might be worries, it might be negative assumptions about what people could be thinking of you, it could be self-criticism. So just for an example for today, thinking about not being good enough is one that's quite frequent with people that I work with the depression. So somebody might think that a job that they've just done is not good enough, that they haven't achieved enough throughout the day that they perhaps expected of themselves. Therefore, they might interpret that as, you know, I'm a rubbish person, I'm failing, I'm not doing what I should, I'm not coping. So what I want you to do when you've noticed those thoughts is try to think of a thought that relates to the situation that brought that thought on, but something that's okay and that's perhaps neutral. So a neutral and okay type thought that's not entirely positive. How would you do that, and how would you think about something that feels realistic as well, so you don't feel like you're lying to yourself? So this will take some practice, but it does get easier the more you do it. And it would be different for everybody depending on what situation it is as well. So the thought of I'm not good enough might occur, as well as other thoughts that influence that are very similar to this. And you then might want to notice things like, okay, well, I'm not always good enough, or I'm not always perfect, and I do struggle sometimes. So by doing this, you're not actually feeding that thought of I'm not good enough, believing it, adding truth to it. you're noticing that sometimes this feels like the case, but not always. There might be things that you're good at sometimes and not so good at other times, or you might be skilled in certain areas and not other areas. Noticing in that case that we all have our own strengths, we all have our own limitations, we all have room to develop and learn. So looking at this much more flexibly is the aim, rather than trying to force yourself to believe something positive such as I'm fantastic, when you absolutely don't believe that in that moment. So what this can do, when you're starting to notice your mood change, how this affects your thoughts, and shifting your thoughts to something that's more neutral and okay, it starts to have an impact on your emotional state. So you might notice after trying to recognize thoughts that are okay and more neutral about a situation or yourself, that your emotional state is not as bad as it was perhaps 5, 10, 15 minutes ago, when you had started to validate your emotion. So it might be that you still feel bad, but you don't feel as bad as you did before starting to gently challenge these thoughts. So the aim of this is to, when this is done again and again and again, over time, you'll find it easier to shift up this scale more and more. So you might start to encourage more okay and neutral thoughts, more so than just negative, much more easily. And once you're able to do this, you'll then be able to shift up to encouraging more perhaps positive thoughts that feel more believable. So never again forcing yourself to believe something that you don't believe, but when you're starting to encourage more thoughts that are not negative, it's much easier to see things differently and then believe more positive things about yourself, others, situations. So this is more of a gradual process that you can use over a longer period of time. It does take a long time to encourage and develop thought change. So be very patient with it, and be patient with yourself as well. And just notice from using these scales how you experience emotion and how that impacts your thoughts, what you can do with your thoughts depending on what part of the scale you're at, to make them that little bit more neutral, and then notice the impact that has on your mood afterwards as well. So you might want to practice this exercise 2-3 times a week, even just once a week if you're short for time, but certainly try not to allow those negative thoughts and negative mood to sit there for too long and believe the negative thoughts as a result of feeling really bad. Okay, so hopefully this has been helpful for you and expands on a video that I've done before this on thought challenging, and hopefully it'll help you to get to see things a little bit more visually, so you can either visualize that in your own mind or try to map something out like this similar for yourself. So thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed what I've brought today, and I hope you have some success with it. Good luck and take care.